Hello, my name is Peter Martin. This virtual tour of Victorian Bromley was first broadcast via Zoom on the 10th of May 2021 by the Bromley Civic Society. This is a map of the Bromley area in 1861, and we're going to look at this particular area, which was in 1861 was completely undeveloped. Was known as the Cage Field, because I think there was a lockup in the area at the time for people who were drunk and disorderly. But by 1895, this entire area had been virtually developed completely. So the road pattern is much as it is today. And you'll notice that the road pattern, East Street and North Street and Tweedy Road, all follow the pattern of footpaths that existed in 1861. So we're going to start at this point here at the bottom of East Street. We're going to progress up East Street along into South Street, back out again, along to the end of East Street and around North Street, down College Slip and back down to the Royal Bell. And we'll have a look at the Royal Bell because that's a very interesting, very important Victorian building. What we're not going to look at is the Town Hall, which is one of the most important buildings in the area, but we haven't got. It's worth a tour on its own right, but we're not going to look at that today. We're also not going to look in detail at the Bromley and Shepards College, and neither are we going to look at the church in any detail. Otherwise, it would take too long. It's a selected tour of particular buildings that put together tell a story about the growth of Victorian Bromley in that period after 1861. What we'll do is shoot down the High Street and look at two more buildings, Aberdeen Buildings and Ravensfell House. So we're going to start now and go straight into the bottom of East Street and turn round. I'm sure this is a familiar view for most of you. And we're going to start with a very important building marking the beginning of local democracy in Bromley. It's the local board office. It housed the first elected local government in Bromley in 1868. It was the first building really in this Cage Field area. And you'll see that there's estate agents built into the bottom floor, but originally it didn't have that. It housed 12 elected members that met in a council chamber on the top floor. It was one man, one vote, and it marks a time when the landed gentry of the area began to lose their privileged position. And it was later to become the Urban District Council before moving in 1904 to the Grand Town Hall in Tweedy Road. So this is the first building where elected democracy existed. And you'll see there, by this time, this is about the end of the century, you've got the estate agent is now built into the bottom of the building. And we've got a view up East Street, and we're going to progress up there later. Somebody's just admitting somebody. It's a very simple building, but very nicely detailed. I like to think this is the hole where people paid the poor rate. Quite an attractive building, but located here was the clerk to the board. I've looked at the Strong's directory for 1882, and against this address, you've got the Clerk to the Board, the Bromley Burial Board, the West Kent Sewage Board, offices of the Board of Guardians, the Royal Sanitary Association, the Superintendent Registrar's Office, all in this local board office in 1882. One wonders how they got them all in there, but actually it was only a few people, and those responsibilities were all carried out by one man. It was probably the first town clerk. His name was R.G. Mullen, because Bromley was still quite a small place at this time. It hadn't grown into the suburb that we all know and love today. This is the offices as it is today. A private company is up there, and they very kindly let me photograph inside. Originally, it would have had this these timber vaults in the ceiling over the council chamber. Unfortunately, that was damaged in 2007 when by a fire. But this is looking back towards the back end of the building, so it had quite an impressive interior. And at the bottom of these corbels, they had this decorative corbels on them, and those are still there today, and they've been protected. It's the only thing that gives the game away. This was once an important Victorian building. So back outside now, we're going to just progress up into East Street, but before we go too far, we'll just swing around and have a look at this very odd, thin building. Just admitting somebody, which always makes me smile, because this was a typical example of Victorian entrepreneurship when the land in the Cage Field was being released by terms of a lease. All this land was released all at once. Here we had somebody who snapped up a bit of land and maximized it, the development on it as much as possible with this crazy sort of thin building, and it still functions today. And moving on from that, we're going to have a look at just turn into South Street and have a look at these houses in South Street, and as a better look at them. These were built at about the same time as the local board office in the 1860s. It's the first purpose-built housing in Bromley for what I should say are the lower classes, not necessarily working class, but the lower classes, artisans, teachers, dressmakers, a lot of them working from home. Working from home is not the big recent thing that happens in the pandemic. It's working from home was quite common at this time in Victorian times. Housing hitherto in Bromley were either rural style cottages, or they're big villas for the well-off, and lots of servants. So these are quite an innovation, important buildings in the 1860s. One important resident in this row of houses was Mrs. Knott, and Mrs. Knott ran a dame's school. Dame schools were an early form of Victorian education for infants. And one famous infant that came to this dame school was H.G. Wells. And he came here when this was a new house. In something like this, it would have probably been a bit better than is depicted on that engraving, but he would have had some basic education here from the age of 5 in 1871. And he writes about it. He says that he was taken off to school in a room in a row of cottages near the drill hall, and we'll see that later. And to be kept by an unqualified old lady, Mrs. Knott, and her equally unqualified daughter, Miss Salmon, where I learnt to say my tables of weights and measures, read words of 2 or more syllables, and pretended to do summing. It was incomprehensible fudging that was never explained to me. And all these work was done on a slate. So he had a very basic education. I think most of his early education came from his mother, who had taught him a lot more, and where his writing probably came from. And this is a well-known picture of Bertie, as his mum called him, probably aged about 13, after he moved on to a private academy school in Bromley North. So we'll move on from there. We'll pan back to East Street, and we'll have a look at the drill hall that H.G. Wells was referring to in the quote just now. And as a youngster, as a 5-year-old on his way to Mrs. Knott's Dame School, Bertie would have seen this being built in 1872. It was the first all-purpose entertainment hall, doubling as a drill hall for the 18th Kent Volunteer Rifles. It's recorded that when the hall was opened with a concert where Sir Arthur Sullivan of Gilbert and Sullivan fame appeared as an accompanist. So the building has kept its open nature as a pub as it is now. I haven't got a photograph of its interior, but it was the scene of grand banquets and concerts and important public meetings. It was later acquired by the GPO as a sorting office, and it was saved from demolition after the town centre conservation area was designated in 1985. I think it would have gone had it not been for the conservation area. Its present use as a pub, as I say, it keeps that open interior. It was used as an army recruitment office, and the photo shows the advance guard assembling before they departed for Dover on the way to the trenches of the First World War. You can see the drill hall up there in the distance. Now, just progressing up East Street a bit further, just turning round and have a look at the view back. And this is a photo of what it looked like in the probably in the 1870s. I haven't got a precise date for this photo. Note the state of the road. It's virtually mud, because of course the primary mode of transport here was horses at this time. Note also the row of houses down here, very similar to those in South Street. They were obviously built at the same time. Look also at this tower here. We're going to see a lot more of that. That was a very prominent town hall building. It was demolished in the 1930s, built by Cole's Child, who was the important landowner in the area. Now, this is looking the other way, and those are the same houses. Of course, they're now shops, and this is the view in Victorian times when they had been converted to shops, unlike the ones in South Street, of course. And by this time, East Street had become quite an important shopping street, albeit with the smaller shops. And we're going to progress up East Street now. You notice that the street, the actual vehicular part of the street, is now much narrower, with tables and chairs out. And we're going to have a look at this particular building here. And where, as I said, East Street was developing as an area for small shops, this was a somewhat grander shop. And if you've got an eagle eye, you'll notice that it's actually asymmetrical. It's got a party wall that's just down this side, which is slightly unusual. But the reason for that is that this building was built in stages, and it was built by the Cooperative Society. Eventually it became quite a big department store for the co-op. And the co-op wasn't particularly welcome in Bromley when they first became established in 1870. And in 1870, they were first established in Bromley South. And this is the report in the Bromley Record. They said, "Dead, despised and neglected, another cooperative society not likely to meet with support in Bromley, and the sooner they are kicked out of existence, the better." Pauperism is increasing. This is laid at the door of co-op societies. Pauperism, what a word. I think it means blaming the poor for their poverty. That was the attitude in 1870. But by the time this had been completed, it wasn't finally completed until 1903. But by 1903, it's reported, when the whole building is complete, it will stand as a striking monument to the industrial capacity of the working clan of Bromley, erected by working men with working men's money. That was a report of a historian for the Co-op Society. So it did develop into a very prosperous and quite a big department store. It stayed there until the 1980s when a larger department store was built in Widmore Road. This is a bit of a departure because this is not Victorian Bromley, but there is a connection. Co-op department store in Widmore Road, some of you may remember, I certainly do. It became a sort of market hall and was finally demolished in the 1990s or the end of the 80s, primarily to make way for the Glades. In this rather grand Art Deco building, there were these Art Deco screens which were rescued by Tony Banfield, who's now the chairman of Civic Society, and he's joining us today, I see. So make a note of those because we'll be seeing those a bit later on our tour. So back to the market parade, and we're going to have a look at the back of this building. This part of the building is the sort of working side, the industrial side of the shops in East Street. And in this particular building, part of the Co-op department store, they baked bread. They baked bread on a massive scale, manufactured really for the first time in Bromley. And all that area up the top there was where they prepared the dough and sent them down to the ovens down below. But now, as I say, the Co-op here finished trading in the 1930s, 1933 in fact, before they moved to Widmore Road. And the building stayed empty for a while, but it got taken over by the Bromley Little Theatre. And we're just going to venture into the theatre. On theatre nights, they don't have so many cars parked outside, but there are the ovens, which are underneath the auditorium. And here is the bar, ready to receive visitors. And this is the auditorium. I don't know if anybody's here has visited Bromley Little Theatre, but it's certainly a very thoroughgoing, professional sort of theatre, although nobody gets paid when they perform at Bromley Little Theatre. It is it is a registered charity and amateur in amateur dramatics, but it's a very good auditorium, and about to restart their performances this June. Of course, it's been closed over a year, although they've been doing quite a lot of online performances. So moving back out in front of Market Parade, now we're going to move on to the Railway Tavern, or the Railway Hotel as it was, built in 1879, so quite early on in the development of this area. In fact, it was one of the first after the local board office. It was probably the next building to be erected, and a very interesting arts and crafts style building. Arts and crafts means that they love to, the architects love to put decorate the buildings with features and of a rural style, preferably shells in the case of the Railway Tavern, because shells are quite important in Bromley, symbol of pilgrimage and symbol of the bishops of Rochester that own most of the land in this area in the past. And so shells feature quite prominently here. Interestingly, this was indicate in the Strong's directory as temperance in 1879. The Railway Hotel as a temperance hotel, which is very odd because the name of the brewer, Nolder and Collier, is actually embodied in the building itself, and they built the building. It was clearly intended to be a building for the sale of and consumption of alcohol. And I think that temperance, initially it was a temperance hotel just to get round the terms of the lease that was governed the release of land in Cage Field. And it bears in mind that there were a lot of pubs in Bromley at this time, and the landed gentry and those in power were very concerned about drunkenness and drunkenness amongst the working classes in particular, and felt this affected productivity, and there were a lot of temperance societies operating around Bromley at the time, and elsewhere, of course. And it's a very interesting building. In Victorian times, of course, it was a very stratified society, and in reflection of that, there are a labyrinth of rooms on the ground floor of the Railway Tavern. Each set of rooms, there are 3 entrances. Each entrance and each room was dedicated to a particular purpose, a particular class. And in the case of the Railway Tavern, there is actually a private room at the back where I imagine gentlemen would have taken their meals and be served separately from the bar. So just a reminder where we are in Cage Field. We're just at that junction of all the footpaths. We've come up East Street, and we're going to head down North Street to the right there. But just to get a feel for what it might have been like back in 1861. This is a copy of a watercolor by somebody called Wormsley. It's dated 1858, and there you have the view of the church tower, Bromley Church Tower, which still exists today, but of course we can't see it from this view now. but that might have been what it was like. A very rural feel to it, and quite a small market town. Now we're moving back now to North Street, and we're going to progress down North Street. And once again, we have these houses which were purpose built for the lower classes. These are dated 1877. They're a bit bigger than those in South Street, with bay windows, but the occupations, and I have looked at the census data for this area, census dating in 1881, and the occupations of residents here included coffee house keepers, compositors, accountants, shop managers, quite a few servants, funnily enough, mostly young teenagers, a lot of boarders. So it's a very, very densely populated area. And of course, it was the beginnings of commuting, because many would have commuted up to London with the new railway at Bromley North that had opened in 1878. It shows that Bromley was growing as a suburb of London, even at this time. So a bit further down North Street on the right-hand side, we have the Methodist Church, but that is built on the site of the National School, which was shown on the map of 1861. H.G. Wells would have known this school, but he didn't go here. He writes about fighting the boys that went here in set battles out on Martin's Hill. He called them the Water Rats. And he went to a private school in Bromley, as I said, called Morley's Academy. So we're going to pan round from the Methodist Church, and we're going to head across into College Green. But once again, just a reminder where we are. We're at this spot now, opposite where the National School was, and we're going to head down College Green. But before we head down, we'll just have a look at this area here, which is now College Green. And that area, you can see shaded there, was a nurseries back in 1861, tended by the Bromley and Shepards College, but it's the only area that is not developed. All this other area was developed in a very short space of time. Certainly by the end of the century, it was all developed, and of course it's still open today. And we're just going to have a look at that pan round from the famous mulberry tree, which was planted in a very early time, and is now looked after very well by the Friends of Bromley Town Parks and Gardens. And a very attractive park it is too. Now we're going to progress down College Slip, which was one of our ancient footpaths, which on old maps extended out to Bickley and beyond. And this old cottage is a typical Kentish vernacular building built in the mid-18th century, so predates our Victorian buildings. It's a seedsman's cottage, and it was tied to the nursery that we've just seen, because the nursery stayed there until the 1980s, and before it was made into College Green, made into a park. Note the shape of this roof, which is a traditional Kentish vernacular roof with the heavy tiles on the top part of the roof and the lighter tiles on the side. That we'll see a few more of those a bit later on. But when you see that, you'll know that it's an early Kentish vernacular building. Progressing on down College Slip, just have a glimpse now of the Bromley and Shepards College. As I say, this is worth a tour in its own right, and perhaps we will do one later in the year. Beautiful oasis, really, in the middle of the town, and dates from 1666 and thereafter, and a very beautiful set of buildings, Grade 1 listed. Now back on to College Slip. We're going to just look round at the Swan and Mitre pub, which is one of the early coaching inns in Bromley. Notice how the pub is actually set back off the road, and that is really to enable horses to park or whatever they do with horses, bring them up to the front of the house, the pub, and they could drink from their trough. And this is another view, and there you see the horse trough, and the way the building is set back off the road to enable them to pull in. This would have been on their journey out from London. By the time they got here, they needed to at least have a drink. And see, once again, you'll see the road in a very messy state, which it would be if your main mode of transport is horses. Note also the ubiquitous Nolder and Collier. They were based in Croydon, and they seem to be the only purveyors of stout and India Pale Ale in the area. Interestingly, it had a different name when this photo was taken. It's called the Commercial Inn. But I think the Swan and Mitre, the words Swan and Mitre do appear on there. So let's move around now from the Swan and Mitre down the northern part of the High Street, and we'll have a look at the Star and Garter. And Star and Garter was built in 1898, and this photo must have been taken very near the end of the century, if not in the early part of the 20th century. But this was before the Star and Garter was built, because the Star and Garter was still there, but it replaced an earlier building. Once again, Nolder and Collier, the same architects. Notice that the road is somewhat narrower, and that widening took place later in the century. And here we have the whole place decked out for the Jubilee of Queen Victoria. Hail to Victoria, Queen of the Free, with all loyal wishes at this Jubilee. And I love this bowler-hatted gentleman fixing the wires at the top, and this gentleman here as well looks a bit battered, actually, standing outside the door of the pub. And just looking at the building today, this is Grade 2 listed building. The architects were Burnett and Son, who seem to be the commissioned architects for the brewers, Nolder and Collier. And it's a final flourishing, really, of the arts and crafts Old English style in its most flamboyant. Look at the projecting tiles and the projecting bays and the turret. It's in particular the carved wooden medallion. All things that arts and crafts architect like to do to liven up their buildings and make them look like an old country inn in this case, and very flamboyant. It's a precursor really of the Tudor-Beaton style popular in suburban Bromley. Mosaic in the floorway, looking a bit grubby actually. And some very nice original fireplaces inside. And you might have noticed that's where we get our logo from. The Bromley Civic Society logo comes from there. Just swinging round now from the Star and Garter to the picture house. Of course, this is not Victorian. This was 1930s Art Deco, which was recently been very successfully, I think, refurbished and repaired and extended. Now, remember I told you about the Art Deco screens that were rescued from the Co-op building in Widmore Road. These now appear inside the picture house in the bar area of the picture house, and there by courtesy of Tony Banfield and the Civic Society, they are really contribute to the Art Deco atmosphere of that part of the inside of the picture house. So that's a good, successful conservation story. Back out into the high street, there's the medallion of the Star and Garter, a very important landmark really in Bromley. I tried to get a photo of it, but there's in a way there's too much clutter today. Moving on down now to the Royal Bell. And this is what it looked like a few years ago. This is a photo from street view. Just notice the pargeting. Now it is very recently been refurbished and cleaned. The exterior of the building's been extensively cleaned and restored, and very successfully. Notice now the pargeting is being picked out in this detail, and it's a very fine building, and we hope to see it being used for something, possibly with the bar area on the ground floor at least, later this summer. We're in contact with the owners, and we're working with them. I hope to get something going. Now, the building was by Ernest Newton, 1898, in the Queen Anne style. Once again, arts and crafts, but the intention was to extend that style of building all the way along the high street. But as you can see, it stopped there. But there we have one of the old Kentish vernacular buildings, which is still there today, and appears in all the old photos. The current Royal Bell building, as I say, was built in 1898. It replaced this building, the Bell, and there's another view of it. Once again, you see the old Kentish vernacular building on a somewhat narrower road. But this is the building that is referred to in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, when Lady Catherine de Bourgh says to Elizabeth Bennet, "Where shall you change horses?" "Oh, Bromley, of course. If you mention my name at the Bell, you'll be attended to." And it points out to the fact that Jane Austen frequently travelled to Kent to visit her brother and would certainly have changed horses at the Bell. And somebody asked me when I presented this a few weeks ago, so why were they changing horses at the Bell? And surely horses could manage a bit more. This is on the route from central London out to probably Hastings, or ports on the coast. I think it's because it was a staging post. It was it's the equivalent of a bus depot, I suppose, where you would change the horses on a regular basis, and then other horses would take the carriage back. I'm not sure, but it's an interesting point of research as to how these coaching inns worked. But unlike the Swan and Mitre, this had proper stables at the back and was commissioned to serve the Royal Mail coaches, and hence the word royal was put in front of the bell. Moving on quickly, this once again is another view of the old bell, and replaced in 1898 by this, which is still there today. And this is how the pargeting looked so a little while ago, and now it's been lovingly restored. And look in particular at these lettering, which is very typical of arts and crafts lettering. 1898 was when it was built. 1666, it may relate to the date of the earlier bell building. And this is the gentleman, his name is the architect who restored himself restored all those panels, and his name's Benny O'Looney, and we're still very much in contact with him. Now, looking inside the bell, the Royal Bell, you'll see that it has this wonderful resource of a banqueting hall, and a lot of the internal details have been kept. And the ceilings are in very good condition. This is how it might have looked when there was a banquet going on. And you can see that the fireplace is there in its grand form. And this is one of the front rooms, function rooms, and they had banquets there as well. And you'll see the fireplace being restored there. This is the proposal that the owners have planning permission for this tower as a to become a 5-star hotel, with this connected with the main building here. It has permission. I'm not sure that that's going to get built, but in the meantime, there's scope for uses in the main building. Looking down into Market Square, this is what it would have looked like in around about the turn of the century. Once again, there's this ubiquitous town hall building, which we see, and looking to behind this spot, we look at the Pamphilons, which was dated 1876 and was originally a wine merchant's, and is currently being refurbished. This is what it would look like, what it would have looked like. Interestingly, there's a date of 1775 on the front. That's not the date of the building, it's the date of establishment of Pamphilons as a wine merchants. But the detail of the building is being protected or being preserved, with the name of the wine merchant being kept over the arch. Also the other arch, and in particular this bunches of grapes which appear on the pilasters all the way along the building. And looking at the bank building, very elaborate bank building. It's a grade 2 listed town hall buildings, it was called, built in 1887, towards the end of our period, by local butcher David Harris, who occupied the corner section. You can see corner section, Covell and Harris, who were the butchers of the time. It's in the arts and crafts style with characteristic Dutch influence. Note the fantastic red terracotta details and red brick, fantastic creatures. Also the CNH, which is Covell and Harris, and this is how owners of buildings, if they've invested so much in the building, they like to have their name featuring on it somewhere. It indicates butchers were very wealthy, important people in the days. Notice the statues on the top of this Victorian of the building. Well, they're not there now, and it would have been a nightmare, I think, to maintain those if they were ever there. I'm not sure that they ever were. Now, on that same corner, if we're looking back at the church, this is the Victorian view. You can see the corner of Covell and Harris on the side of the photo, and there's the tower of the church, which is the same tower that we saw in that painting, in the 1858 painting. The church was almost completely destroyed in World War II by bombs in World War II, but the tower remains, and the tower is the same. So it's an interesting view from that point of view. But also look at these fantastic gas lights, aren't they wonderful? And huge gas lights, which must have been very common in Bromley at the time. Now we're jumping down the high street to one of the last buildings now, Aberdeen Buildings, which was 1887, French Empire style with curved roofs that you see in Paris. And it's built by another local butcher who grew rich, Amos Bora. The style is thought to be a tribute to the Emperor Napoleon III and Empress Eugenie living in exile at Camden Place in Chislehurst, for whom Mr. Bora was a purveyor of meat. And there's some lovely details on this building near the top. See the curved roofs, but also the clock. Actually, the clock is not original. I don't think it was on the building originally, but nevertheless, it suits the building completely. 1887. Once again, you see how they pull up the detail in terracotta. And that's the Victorian view of Aberdeen Buildings. Once again, these wonderful gas lamps that you see and all the detail. But note in particular the wrought iron railings on the tops of these Parisian style roofs. Well, they've not survived. They've not survived, and I'm not surprised really. I think they would have been difficult to maintain. There's the old town hall again. Once again, a very important landmark in Bromley at the time. Now, swinging around. Oh, sorry, I've skipped a bit. This is another view of Aberdeen Buildings, but we've got a proposal some of you may know about for a feature in the High Street, which we're very concerned about because it's slap bang in front of Aberdeen Buildings, and it's still extant. So if you want to object to that, please feel free. And now swinging around from Aberdeen Buildings up to Ravensfell House, which is the last building we're going to look at. Currently marooned by shops, but originally this was one of the villas that were dotted down the lower part of High Street. It was built in 1858. and it lasted until the 1930s. It ended up being surrounded by shops like this. The shops were initially built literally in the front garden. This is a more distant view of Ravensfell House, and this is currently what is proposed behind, in the area behind. And this is another thing where the Bromley Civic Society has been campaigning against, but we understand that this has been scaled down a bit, and we're waiting for a new application to come in. So we just hope this is not as big as it appears there, but at least you'll see Ravensfell building is supposedly safe for the time being. Thank you for watching the virtual tour of Victorian Bromley. If you've enjoyed the tour, you might consider joining us or making a donation. Visit bromleycivicsociety.org.uk and select the membership page. Thank you.